Okay, a couple more things that I bought. I bought Candy and Cigarettes Volumes 5 and 6. And by the way, the cover of Volume 6 possibly goes harder than anything I've ever seen. Love this. Anyway, I'm sure you've heard me talk about Candy and Cigarettes in the past. I absolutely love it. It's kind of like a neo-noir series about a little girl and an old man who end up being assassins together. Borrows a lot of elements from that movie Leon, or you might know it as The Professional. And just a lot of great grindhouse style, just pulp action. I have been a little conflicted on this series as I'm reaching the halfway point now. Because I was sort of intrigued by the first volume, but I also had that thought of, this isn't gonna have a bunch of creepy illustrations of this little girl in it, is it? And for the most part, I feel like it stays away from that element. But then I get frustrated because I open up volume 5 and it's the very first page is just little girl butt. And I'm like, bro, come on. I'm like, are we not above this? Can we not do better than this? Who is this for, really? Do you need to cater to that audience? If it wasn't just for that occasional underlying element of it, then this would probably be a 10 out of 10 series for me. It's I really love the characters, and I like how the action keeps up its pace, how there's always something interesting going on. It's indulgent and fun, but you also find out some interesting backstories about these characters, and it's really interesting when somebody from a character's past shows back up and introduces new complications into the current story. Honestly, for a pulp action series, it's still really well written in that way. And I just really love the art style too. The art style is good enough that alone makes me want to read more manga by this artist. And by the way, I do still highly recommend this one. It is a short, completed series, which I think is going to have 11 volumes in total. So right now, only 6 of them are out in the US, soon to be 7, but I am in all likelihood going to be collecting all volumes of that one. I definitely think more people ought to be reading it. I've also recently gotten through Volume 4 of Chojin X. Once I got to the 3rd volume of this one, it was really picking up. I was kind of so-so on the first couple of volumes. I thought they were pretty good, but by Volume 3 I was oh yeah, I am on board for this one. As you might have heard me describe it before, this is kind of a take on the superhero genre by the artist who made Tokyo Ghoul, which I have not read and only watched the first season of in anime. But I might actually go and read Tokyo Ghoul one day after reading Chojin X and liking it so much. Because honestly, I don't know, the artist has this kind of subtle sense of humor that doesn't really play in the Tokyo Ghoul anime. And maybe Tokyo Ghoul wasn't written that way, I don't know, but I feel Chojin X does a really good job of striking a balance between some amount of levity, but also making a heavy and serious story when it needs to be heavy and serious and emotional. I mentioned that it's kind of a take on the superhero genre, but it's not really in a way that feels traditionally superhero-ish. It's kind of the anti My Hero Academia, if that makes sense, or My Anti-Hero Academia, maybe. Because it doesn't really touch on the usual tropes of superheroes having a secret identity, or having a superhero name and a civilian name. It doesn't go over here's how you will fight villains, and here's how you manage your public image as a superhero, and here's how you be marketable. It feels like a bit of a more realistic take on what if there were people with superpowers in the world. And it does have that element of some people with powers are teaching others how to use their powers. So there is a bit of a Hero Academia element to it, but in a very unconventional way. Mostly I just really love the drama between the characters and just some absolutely stunning horror illustrations going on here. I will definitely be reading more of that. It's also occurring to me, we have gotten to my reading for November at this point, and I don't think I have encountered a single series that I'm planning to drop. Pretty big difference from my last batch of videos. Alright, I've got another one of the greats. I got Dan to Dan Volume 4 and Dan to Dan Volume 5. I figure it's probably not supposed to be pronounced Dan to Dan, but I just like to say it that way because it sounds funnier. This one continues to be a high recommendation for me. I plan to continue collecting every volume of it. And wouldn't you know it, it had an anime finally confirmed. And it's going to be animated by Science Saru, and it's going to be so good. And there is a teaser trailer out, and man, I can't wait now. Anyway, as much as I love the, supernatural creature illustrations, and as much as I think the action scenes are just so slick and just fantastically choreographed on the page, the thing that really keeps me coming back to it is just how strong the characters are. I like the kind of on-again, off-again flirtatious nature that the two main characters have, but then, this dude gets introduced in, I think, the 4th volume, who is, the childhood friend of the female main character. And so then there's kind of, a rivalry between him and the male main character. But it's also, more complex than just the main guy thinking, oh, this guy's a piece of shit. Because they spend time together, and then the main guy is just kind of I really can't hate this guy. He is genuinely a good dude. But also, I want to date the girl, and I want him to not date the girl. And I think that's kind of a refreshing type of character to see in a series like this. It's a little more grounded, a little more realistic. It makes the characters feel more real when they are able to acknowledge the good in other people and not just see them as, a rival and nothing else. So yep, I'm continuing to pre-order every volume of this, and I cannot wait for the anime. You shouldn't be able to wait either. It's so good, you should read this series right now. Alright, I also bought something that was much anticipated for me. We finally get Sheeply Horned Witch Romy Volume 2. I was waiting so long for this. It took over a year from the release of the first volume for the second volume to come out, which is so frustrating. Naturally, I had to reread Volume 1 before starting on Volume 2 just to refresh myself on what had happened, because it had been a year since I last read it. Once again, the art style is immaculate. There is nothing like it in the world, and I adore it. I want to read the entire series just to see more of this kind of art. It is so cool looking. One panel from this manga has been my desktop background for about the last year or so. The unfortunate thing I have to say about it now is I kind of feel like it has lost the plot a little in Volume 2, or I guess it's gone in a direction that I wasn't expecting, but if it had gone the way I was expecting, I would have preferred that. It's also kind of hard to explain what is going on in the series. It gets, kind of complicated. Not, overly convoluted or anything to where, it's hard for me to understand, but there's just a lot to catch up on. I guess the first volume ended with Romy kind of succumbing to some kind of evil magic, and she tells the main dude to go and find the scattered pieces of herself to make her whole again in this magical apocalyptic world where he is now the only survivor. And the direction I thought it was going to take was that he would travel around this strange magical world and uncover all of these elements of her that would represent her past, and maybe even traumatic events that happened to her that kind of shaped the character she was in Volume 1, and would kind of explain to us how she ended up so jaded and just kind of fed up with the world that she wanted to see it end. It didn't really take that direction at all. Instead, the main character kind of finds out that there are a bunch of copies of himself all roaming the world and going on adventures and finding the scattered fragments of Romy, trying to put her back together and put the world back together. And a lot of the chapters in Volume 2 are just these copies of this guy interacting with each other and kind of vying for power in a way. and all trying to be like the one true version of this guy. So I don't know. I will say though, the story was not the whole reason I was reading it in the first place. I wasn't like super gripped by Volume 1, maybe until its last chapter. It was first and foremost the art that kept me reading, and it is the art that is going to keep me reading in the future. I don't care if it completely devolves into nonsense, as long as it's this artist's art carrying me there. Here's a couple more things I bought recently. The special hardcover edition of My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness did finally release. I've got that. And Nagatakabi came out with a new book called My Pancreas Broke, But My Life Got Better. This new book might be a little difficult to talk about. The things that drew me into this artist's earlier books were how she explored emotions and like illustrated deep emotions in creative and like intuitive ways, and particularly when that came to figuring out her gender identity and like sexual orientation, and just the ways that she and people in general connect with other people on an emotional level. I really liked reading the way she would analyze things like that. I thought they rang really true and made the books really inexplicably relatable in a way that I never could have foreseen. After My Alcoholic Escape from Reality, the books kind of become a lot more troubling to me. Like, it no longer seems to have that tone of like self-discovery, and instead it's just kind of like, here's what a horrible alcoholic I am, and here's how my life is falling apart, and here's all of the horrible pain I went through in the hospital from drinking too much. So when I saw the title, My Pancreas Broke, But My Life Got Better, I thought there was going to be like a big optimistic upturn within the course of this newest book. The thing that I kind of anticipated was that there might be some chapter where she's like, oh, it turns out my books started getting published overseas, and they became really popular in countries across the world, and I started making enough money that I can live comfortably. Instead, the closest thing we got to that was, in addition to alcohol addiction, I'm also addicted to online shopping, and I cannot handle my money responsibly. Oh. So that second part of the title, But My Life Got Better, kind of rings a little hollow as you get to the end of this book. I don't know how to describe it too well, but I just feel like like the My Life Got Better part I think is supposed to be about how she has started going to rehab groups and wants to like take steps to curb her alcoholism, but you know, going to a support group like that is only the first step of recovery. You know, you can't just say, oh, I started going to an alcoholic recovery group, so my problems are solved now. And that's what I find kind of troubling, is this kind of like undercurrent of like, I've read these like 5 other books by this artist, and I feel like I have gotten to know her habits through what she's described here. So when she says, I'm going to rehab and everything is looking great, I think when I closed that book, I said, man, I hope so. It ended for me with that kind of tone where I'm just like, man, I really hope things are going to pick up. Because you see, like, after My Alcoholic Escape from Reality, she has these, like, kind of relapse moments where she just kind of sinks back into old habits and things just kind of get worse once again. And I'm really hoping that that's not going to be the case again when I read her next book. It just, I don't know, it starts to feel really heavy where it shifts from reading about a character discovering their identity and like coming to grips with their emotions, and it has kind of become a series where you're reading about somebody slowly killing herself through her own self-destructive habits. And it's just more and more like shifting from uncomfortable to read into painful to read. So, you know, even more than I want to say, I hope the next book is better, I want to say I hope this artist's life gets better, even if she never puts out another book in her life. Okay, I read up to volume 3 of Demons of the Shadow Realm, the new manga by the creator of Full Metal Alchemist. I'm still really enjoying this one a lot. It's, you know, as usual, it's got really great action scenes, which she is really well known for from Full Metal Alchemist. But I also love the, like, fish-out-of-water comedy elements to it, because the main guy was somebody who was raised in, like, a secluded mountain village, and basically was living at a technological and cultural level of, like, several hundred years ago. So it's really fun to see him, like, going out into modern society and, like, kind of clashing with the culture there. And the manga also, obviously, from the title, introduces these demons as a concept. And as I'm reading, like, the second and third volumes, it's kind of occurring to me that, like, these demons are kind of like Pokemon. It's kind of the vibe that I'm getting. I mean, there isn't a gotta catch 'em all aspect to it, thankfully, but it is very reminiscent of Pokemon for me, how it's like people can acquire a demon and that demon is like their best friend, but also kind of like their pet, but also they respect it like they would a person, but also they order it to go into combat for them. And so, to some extent, there will be like interpersonal combat, but to a greater extent it's about demons fighting other demons. And it's, I don't know, it's weird how they become like the property of a person. Like, the person gets to decide what to name them, and the demon has to obey their every command for whatever reason. But anyway, yes, between the great fish out of water comedy and the really fun, like, high stakes action scenes, this is one that I'm still fully on board with, will continue reading, might even start collecting in the future. We'll see where it goes. The final thing I read this year, I'm not going to have a whole lot to say about it, I don't think, but I was rereading Chainsaw Man volumes 5 through 11, and then I also went ahead and got volumes 12 and 13, and I read those also. So happy that we're finally getting volumes of Chainsaw Man every couple of months in the US, once again. My stack of manga is getting a little precarious next to me. I hope it's not gonna, like, fall over. Anyway, I just reread Chainsaw Man because the movie just got announced. I cannot wait for that. Can't wait to see this adaptation of the next arc. And man, when we get another season or whatever is going to happen for, like, volumes 7 through 11... it's falling! Oh! I have to disassemble the manga stack. Anyway, as I was saying, kind of fitting that everything fell apart at that exact moment, because, as I was going to say, once volumes 7 through 11 of Chainsaw Man start getting adapted, man, the world is not going to be ready for what's going to go down in those volumes. I was happy to reread this, though, because I really took my time with it a lot more. I think when the series was first coming out in the US, as soon as a volume came out, I would just immediately devour it. I would speed read it and be done with it in a few minutes, and just, like, felt like I didn't really absorb as much of the information as I did on the reread. So I really, like, took my time on it a lot more. Kind of, like, once you know what's coming up in the future, it's easier to take your time on a reread, because, you know, you're no longer in that point of, I gotta know what happens next, I gotta know what happens next. So there were some occasional, like, interesting tidbits that I never really, like, absorbed on my first read. Like, there's a point where Aki and the Angel Devil are talking about, like, what makes Chainsaw Man so important? Why are people so after him? And Angel Devil reveals this really interesting fact, which is, like, most devils that get born onto the earth have no memory of their time that they lived in hell. But every one of them has the same memory that at the moment of their death, the sound they heard was the sound of Chainsaw Man's chainsaws. And I was like, how did I never notice before that he said that? That's really cool and like really heavy. And I really hope that's going to get revisited later and that we're going to get some like explanation for why that is. But also, the post Volume 11 volumes are going in like a pretty different direction, it seems like. I remember when I first heard that there was going to be a part 2 to the Chainsaw Man manga, part of me hoped that it was going to be like a full-on like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure part 2, where it would have a completely different main character and like a completely different storyline. You know, continuing off of the first one, but going in a very different direction. Not to spoil too much, but as it turns out, Chainsaw Man is still, in fact, a character in Chainsaw Man after Volume 11. It didn't go quite as extreme as JoJo. But a large part of Part 2's plot is like, it's about Denji trying to reveal to the world that he is Chainsaw Man as a way to get chicks, which is so absolutely something he would do. But he's also, like, struggling to get anyone to believe that he could be Chainsaw Man. And somebody framed this for me in a really interesting way. It was probably something random I saw on Twitter or something like that, where they said Part 2 has become about Chainsaw Man having Chainsaw Man as an identity taken away from him. And I thought that was, like, when you look at it that way, it's a really compelling parallel to kind of like Fujimoto's own career with Chainsaw Man, where it feels like, you know, he intended to end it after the 11th volume, and he intended to have it fully concluded, but the world wanted so much more, and they wanted more Chainsaw Man so badly that did he maybe continue making it out of obligation? Does he maybe feel like Chainsaw Man got out of his hands as a creator? Does he maybe feel like it has no longer become a part of his identity, but just sort of a product that exists in the world? I don't know. But I think those are compelling thoughts to have as you read more Chainsaw Man. Which you should, by the way. If it's not clear, I highly recommend Chainsaw Man. It's my absolute favorite these days. And that was the very last thing I was reading in 2023. Hopefully this will all be up on YouTube while it is still winter in 2024. I really hope this one doesn't become my spring of manga like the last one became my fall of manga. But we'll see. Thanks for watching so far and stay tuned for more! Special thanks to all financial supporters of Trooth's Manga Cafe. And thanks to you for reaching the end of my winter 2023 manga catch-up. I know we have crossed over into spring recently, but let's pretend I edited it faster. Stay tuned for more videos, if not in the near future, then around summertime when I do a mid-year catch-up. Now let's turn to Charlie and hear his absolute favorite manga from last year.